Let me begin with a small provocation. If you forget 90% of what you consume, are you really learning? We live in a time where information is everywhere. We read articles, watch videos, listen to podcasts, highlight books, take notes on apps. But if I asked you what you actually retained from last week, chances are it's vague at best. And the truth is, it's not your fault. It's your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do. But that doesn't mean we're helpless. In this lecture, I want to take you deep into the science of memory. Not just how it works, but why it fails. And most importantly, how to work with your brain instead of against it. Because better memory isn't about raw intelligence. It's about understanding the structure of how we encode, store, and retrieve knowledge. Once you learn this, remembering becomes not just easier, but more natural, intuitive, and even joyful. Let's start with this simple but profound truth. Memory is not about repetition. It's about meaning. Your brain is not a hard drive. It doesn't save data by copying it over and over. It doesn't learn by passively receiving information. It learns by actively constructing internal connections, by associating new knowledge with existing frameworks, feelings, narratives, or patterns. This is the reason you remember the lyrics of a childhood song, but forget the definition you read yesterday. Songs have rhythm, emotion, structure. Definitions do not. This is also why you remember embarrassing moments, funny conversations, or emotionally intense events, because your memory prioritizes what matters, emotionally, socially, or biologically. Now, let me show you what this means in practice. When we try to remember a list of facts or concepts, like historical dates, vocabulary, or steps in a process, we often use brute force. We reread, we highlight, we copy notes, and then we wonder why it doesn't stick. That's because the brain, in passive mode, does not encode. It's merely exposed. In cognitive psychology, we distinguish between exposure and retrieval. Exposure is when you see or hear the information. Retrieval is when you actively recall it. And studies show that retrieval practice, trying to recall something from memory, is far more effective than simply reviewing the material. So here's your first real tip. Don't just reread, recall. Close the book. Cover the screen. Try to explain it to yourself. If you can't, you haven't learned it yet. That leads us to one of the most powerful techniques in cognitive science, elaboration. Elaboration means adding meaning to what you're learning. It's asking questions like, why is this important? How does it connect to what I already know? Can I explain this in my own words? What's an example from my own life? Elaboration transforms isolated facts into networks of understanding, and that's what your brain remembers. But let's go deeper still. One of the most underestimated memory tools is storytelling. Not metaphorically, literally. Your brain is a narrative machine. It doesn't store information like a filing cabinet. It stores it like a storybook. That's why memory champions, people who can memorize hundreds of digits or lists, use something called the method of loci or memory palace. They imagine walking through a familiar location and placing vivid, absurd, emotional images along the way. Why does this work? Because it taps into three things the brain loves: spatial orientation, visual imagery, and emotional novelty. It's not magic. It's architecture, neural architecture. You can use this principle in everyday learning by creating what I call emotional anchors. Don't just memorize that serotonin is a neurotransmitter linked to mood. Imagine serotonin as a tiny character in your brain, distributing good vibes at a microscopic party. It's silly, but your brain loves silly. We remember what is unusual, not what is dry. This brings us to the second great ally of memory, emotion. Emotion is not a distraction from learning. It is the engine of it. When you emotionally connect to material, whether through humor, awe, curiosity, or even fear, your brain releases chemicals like norepinephrine and dopamine that signal, "This is important, save this." That's why you remember where you were on major news days, but not what you had for lunch last Thursday. It's not about time, it's about salience. So ask yourself, how can you make what you're learning more emotionally resonant? Can you turn it into a story? Connect it to your struggles, hopes, dreams? Can you make it funny, shocking, beautiful? Let me give you a concrete tool: the generation effect. Research shows that we remember information far better when we generate it ourselves, rather than passively receive it. This means writing your own summaries, drawing your own diagrams, creating your own metaphors. Even getting an answer wrong and correcting it helps encode it more deeply than getting it right the first time. Your brain respects effort. It rewards construction. Another tool: spaced repetition. Your memory decays with time, but not linearly. There are sharp drops in recall unless the brain is reminded at key intervals. Tools like Anki or physical flashcards use algorithms to show you information just before you would forget it, thus strengthening the neural pathway. This is called the spacing effect, and it's one of the most powerful evidence-based techniques in the learning sciences. But none of these will work if you're mentally exhausted, emotionally depleted, or physically overstimulated. So let me be clear, memory is also biological. Sleep, nutrition, stress, and exercise all affect your capacity to encode and retrieve information. You can't separate the mind from the body. A good night's sleep is not a luxury. It's a cognitive investment. And now, finally, I want to leave you with one of the most transformative insights of all. Teach what you learn. This is the protégé effect. When you prepare to teach something, even to an imaginary audience, you are forced to organize the knowledge. You don't just remember what something is, you understand how and why it works. Teaching is not the end of learning. It is the heart of learning. So if you've listened this far, here's your challenge. Take just one idea from this lecture and turn it into a short explanation, out loud, in a journal, in a drawing, or to someone you love. Make it yours. Make it real. That's how memory is made, not by repetition, but by transformation. Because in the end, memory is not a storage problem. It's a connection problem. And now you hold the tools to build those connections, powerfully, emotionally, and for life. So don't try to cram more into your brain. Instead, make what you do learn unforgettable. That's not a trick. That's how memory actually works.